where they, Bhaskaran and Sami, they found that, for example, women invest when they are politicians, so when they are mayors in these municipalities, when there is a woman, there is higher investment into childcare issues, but also health. And but at the same time, for example, for other countries, for example, for our context of Italy, which is the context that I'm going to investigate more closely, the evidence is not so clear. So it's a kind of a controversial issue. Let's say there is not an uncontroversial result on the relationship between the leader of the gender of the leader and the outcome in terms of policies. So we would like to investigate this a little bit better. And for doing this, I'm going to concentrate on the COVID, so on the pandemic period and on the Italian context. So the general question is whether there is a different attention by male and female leaders to childcare during the before, during, and after the COVID pandemic, and in the Italian context. Yes. Okay. We have questions? No. Okay. Okay. Good. Okay, so basically the COVID pandemic is somehow very important because, as we all know, we had a lot of consequences for our economies, but it can also be considered a turning point. For example, when we talk about gender economics and when we talk about the gender effects of the impact of the pandemic on male versus female labor market, male versus female opportunities on the labor market. Sometimes you have seen the expression that this was a kind of she-cession. So it's a recession more for women than for men, because a lot of jobs that were lost were somehow of women. But then we also know that with the recovery after the COVID, so investments made by countries into the different policies, this type of difference was somehow nullified. So we are back to the initial period, at least in terms of female versus male employment rates. The COVID was a big challenge, possibly the biggest after the great financial crisis of 2008. And so we are going to investigate the period around the COVID. The COVID started in February 2020 with the first, let's say, cases. And then there was a period of lockdown from March to May. And in Italy, we have seen a lot of regional measures. So this is why the regional component is very important here. So from November 2020 to December 2021, basically the country was closed many times, but not uniformly across the country. So at the local level, there were a lot of differences. And we also have some previous evidence that suggests that the sectors that were more impacted were services and tourism. And we know that women, when they work, because many times they don't work, especially in Italy, the female employment rate, as you know, is very low. So it's only 50%. But not only it's very low, but it's also very different across the different sectors. So when they work in those sectors, which were particularly hit by the pandemic. We also know that the second, let's say, component of the she-cession was related to school closures, and so to the fact that there was an increase in terms of burden for the families, in terms of caring for children. Of course, thanks to the smart working, so thanks to the possibility to work from home, families that spent more time at home, but that also means that they needed to spend more time with the childcare and homeworks and a lot of these things. So basically, the burden in the family increased. So they received less support from outside, and this burden was also not necessarily equally shared between men and women. So it's an interesting topic, let's say. I have investigated this in other papers, let's say the gender effects of the pandemic on the economy and the allocation of tasks within the family, but this does not have, let's say, a regional component. So this is not the topic of today. So this is to say that childcare became particularly important because one of the main measures was the closure of schools, and so children were at home with their parents. And because this is an important topic in general, let's say in the context of Italy, in terms of maternal employment and gender differences, and also because this is something which is decided at the local level, not at the national level. So we see that childcare gained relevance because of the COVID. So after the COVID, so the average spending increased from 2017 to 2023. This may also due to the fact that the next generation new funds tend to support childcare, so they put some money also investment into childcare. So what we are going to do in this work and in this paper that I would like to present you in the results, we are trying to understand whether leaders display gender-based preferences for childcare spending. So whether we can find some evidence with the data that I have that childcare is a female issue. So women leaders in municipalities care more than male leaders about childcare and spend more. And I'm going to try to understand this in normal times, let's say before the COVID, so collecting data before the COVID, and then during COVID and after COVID. And basically the idea is to see whether these differences continue when there is an emergency like the COVID pandemic, which is a big shock. And so these preferences that we can observe in normal times, are they going to change during the COVID crisis or not? And we didn't know when we started the project, we did not have a clear a priori, because of course we may think that when there is an emergency, we need to collect our effort into the same direction. But you know, we wanted really to see in the what happens in the data, because on the other side, it may also be the case that there is some persistence in the way decisions are taken. So even if there is a big shock, it's difficult to change the way we allocate funds. Okay, so we are going to concentrate on COVID pandemic, on major spending for childcare, because this is done at the municipality level, and on the gender local leaders. These are the three elements that I put into account. And in order to understand whether the gender of the leader has a causal impact on the spending for childcare in the three different periods, before, during, and after the COVID, I'm going to exploit a mixed gender basis among Italian majors. So basically, the identification strategy comes from a difference in discontinuity design. So first from an RDD, so a regression discontinuity design at the margin of victory of the mayor. So basically, in a very simple way, we are going to compare elections in which there was a competition between a man and a woman to become mayor, and the competition was very close. So at the end, one of the two win the elections, but with a small margin. So this is something that has been used extensively in this literature, so it's not my idea. I take it from other people. It has been used extensively in the literature because it is a way to approximate the gender of the mayor as random, as close as random. It's a kind of a natural experiment, because against each other, you can assume that at the end it's by chance that a man or a woman won the election. So this is what we are going to approximate. And therefore, given that the gender is somehow exogenously determined, so it's somehow random, we can assess what they did once they became mayors in terms of public spending. And this suggests a causal impact from the gender to the policy, which you could not have if you simply correlate the gender of the majors with the type of expenditures they have, because people can always say that there is reverse causality. So if you observe that women spend more into childcare, but you don't have a clear identification strategy like this one, you can always say, yes, women spend more in childcare, but it may also be that when there is more childcare, there are more women that are elected, because it's easier for them to become politicians or to have resources to become elected. Or there is like a different culture, a different element in this place, which favors both the election of women and the childcare. So in order to assess causality, we concentrate on these mixed gender races. Yes.
So I have a question on this estimation strategy. So I understand where the exogenous variation comes from using the closed races, but how do you deal with the issue that presumably male and female status correlates with, you know, party affiliation?
Yes,
or like
we have to control that all the covariates are balanced. Yes. Yes.
Okay.
So we include the controls, but we also have to control that at the margin, all the other things are continuous. So there is, the other covariates are balanced. So in terms of political affiliation, in terms of, I have a full set of controls. Yeah, this is what you do. Yeah.
Oh,
okay. So, sorry. Yes, of course. Okay. So, so the before period is 2017, 2019. So we have data for this period. We know what are the preferences for childcare, and we basically are going to show that women were spending more in childcare with respect to men in that time. Then we have the second period, which is the during we call it during or COVID period, 2020, 2021, and then we have the post or recovery period, which is 2022, 2023. Of course, we are still collecting some data, and I am very happy to know that there will be data from the OECD, which will help us also in this direction, because the collection of data is very time consuming in this type of studies. Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the literature, but let's say that there are other studies in that direction that we are observing. For example, studies that try to connect female, let's say the main topic is female leadership during the pandemic. Okay, so you have also seen probably this anecdotal evidence saying, okay, women were better leaders during the pandemic because there were less deaths associated to governments where women were leaders or things like that. So there is some evidence in that direction. We really would like to be very specific in terms of the causal impact. Well, what is a paper which is close to us is this paper by Clémence Tricot that is on Brazil. Okay, so they try to they find and they it on again. Yeah, the so literature, some of you know. Is richer. Okay, so we can exploit these municipalities because we have a lot of observations, let's say, because the number of municipalities is particularly high. We have elections every 5 years, but the elections are staggered, so they do not happen in the same year everywhere, of course, because it depends on the previous election. So some municipalities are elected time T, some other time T+1, etc. So every 5 years. And the municipality is run by a mayor, but then there is an municipal council, which is called Consiglio, and they are elected at the same time. So the mayor is the head of the municipal administration. Then we have executive council with executive power, and municipal council with legislative and supervisory powers. And the mayor can be elected for 2 consecutive mandates. And in most cases, we know the party affiliation, of course, of this of the candidates and the elected politicians. But we have also to say that in this municipal elections, in most of the cases, there is no clear political affiliation, because in many, really, almost all the cases, the candidate lists are like civic lists, so are not clearly affiliated with right or left. So we take this into account, but this is also another important thing. So we make a selection here of. I cannot put it. Okay. No, I think that. Okay. Yes. Yes.
So you don't have a political affiliation there, but do you have like the history of this candidate? If the candidate is the first runner or is the second time?
We know whether they are incumbent or not.
Incumbent.
Yes, incumbency. Yes, this is one of the countries. Yes, sorry, I always forget. Yes.
I don't think it's super important, but I think there was a change in the number of terms mayors can do in cities below a certain threshold.
Yes, I'm going to this because we are.
The second term mayors might be able to run for another term.
We are going to concentrate on small municipalities because there are many things that change. Even the electoral system is different depending on the threshold of the number of residents in the municipality. So we had to make a choice here in order not to have an effect which was confounded with many others. So we only use small, and I will be here in a second. Okay, so we have the balance sheet of the municipalities, which come from this testo unico degli enti locali. So basically we have 2 documents for each municipality. One is the provisional balance sheet and the other is the final balance sheet, and they are proposed by the executive council and then they have to be approved by the municipal council. And in terms of the expenditures, the data are for current and capital account, and we also know that at the local level there are like tribute, taxes and fees and municipal resources, but also transfers from the central government to the local government. So what we are going to use in this paper, unfortunately, we don't have all the information that we would like. Probably we need to work a little bit more on that. But at the moment, what we have mixed gender races in local elections. So we are able to identify for the period 2016 until 2022, the elections where the 2 candidates were very close, and there are mixed gender with a small winning margin. The margin will be determined in the procedure, let's say, in the estimate, but let's say it's small. So we are going to concentrate on small municipalities. So municipalities with less than 5,000 people. This is really small. It means very small, but they are quite a lot in Italy, okay? So why are we doing this? We are doing this for several reasons. Of course, it reduces a lot the sample because we are going to end up with 1,000, as you see there, numerosity, 1,288 municipalities. And I told you that there were almost 8,000. Of course, not all of them have gender close mixed races. So when you do all this sample selection, you end up with a smaller sample. But this is important for several reasons. First of all, because when you, for municipalities with more than 5,000 inhabitants, there are other rules at the elections. For example, there are quotas, gender quotas. And of course, when there are gender quotas, it's more likely that women are elected. So this may somehow confound our effect on the probability for the women to be elected. There is something which is called double preference voting. I don't know if some of you is Italian in this room, but we have something which is an interesting experiment, but we have studied in this paper with Baltronite and others. It's a paper that where, with my co-authors, where we basically have studied the introduction of this double preference voting condition on gender, which means that in the election, you can express two preferences. So voters can express up to two preferences if they are for a man and for a woman. So it's an additional choice, okay? And that was something introduced in 2013 in municipalities with more than 5,000 inhabitants. And we proved in the other paper that this increased the share of women elected. So it's going to confound a little bit our effect. And also because we think that when you concentrate on the small municipalities, the power of the mayor is much more. So the mayor is really powerful somehow in the composition, and therefore it's also closer to the people, and therefore they may have more margins of action in the expenditure. Okay, we excluded the first year of the so-called electoral cycle because we also think that when you are just elected, that you need some time before deciding. And there are many people that talk about this electoral cycle at municipal levels in terms of allocation of expenditure, so we want to be careful. And then we also start in 2017, because before there was something called the Stability Pact at the local level, which basically prevents the municipality, put some constraints to the municipality in terms of the type of expenditure that they wanted to decide. So in the period that we isolate, and in the sample that we isolate, basically there are no many other things happening. So we end up with the data set which is unbalanced because we have pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID, and we try to eliminate this business cycle story. And it's not particularly nice, the fact that it's unbalanced, but at least we have a little bit more observations. We also check the robustness of our results using a balanced data set. So we end up with 1,288 municipalities that are divided between the center and the north in 16 regions. So the ordinary regions plus Sardinia. We are now trying to collect also some other non-special regions, but takes time. Yeah.
So I understand why you're reducing the sample and focusing on the small ones. It's fine. Yes. But then about external validity of these results, or how should we think about them? On the one hand, focusing on small municipalities might give us the upper bound estimates, because if the mayor, because of the small scale, knows everyone, and they will just go to him on the street. So that could then have an effect. On the other hand, it could be the other way around. In bigger cities, maybe women participate more to labor markets, and mayors might be more aware. So how should we think about the estimates given the small sample?
It is true, yes. It is true, yes. In this way, I think we have better internal validity, because we really get rid of all the other things that happen in larger municipalities. But we need to compare at least how our sample is somehow selected with respect to the judge. It's not particularly bad, so we do some checks in terms of how our sample compare to the overall in terms of the characteristics. But yes, but it is true that the external validity is an issue. Yeah. Yes.
Two questions.
Yes.
I wasn't sure about the unbalanced sample. So since the elections are staggered,
yes,
does that mean you remove municipalities which have elections in the middle of the pandemic, or
no?
Do you focus on elections which are have a full cycle from election T to the end of COVID?
No, it means that I don't have the same municipality in the free period. It may be that you have some municipalities before and some other, so not necessarily. It could be if I have a balanced panel, I have to reduce the number, because at the same municipality for the free periods, It's not exactly they coincide. Okay, that's
the
the
ideal would be
meaning.
to have like elections in 17, which and then 23
Yes.
for all municipalities.
For all, yes, but this reduces a little bit the sample. Yeah.
Just a very quick clarification question for myself. You've touched already a lot on how much discretion these local authorities actually have.
Yes.
So the mayor, you said, I mean, can decide on a huge part of the budget, but I'm assuming there's a limit. And do we observe how close these municipalities are already to their limit? Because they would, of course.
Yes, it is true. So what we try to do, so first of all, we are going to concentrate, remember, always on the difference between men and women. So if there are limits, there are for all of them. So we are interested more in the gap rather than in an absolute term. But second, what is important here is that, we also try to control for the composition of the municipal council and the executive committee, although it's not easy to have all this information. Other papers have already done, let's say, this job, because there are other papers that also concentrate on the role, let's say, of the mayor with respect, in terms at least of gender, with respect to the composition of the other bodies. So we try to repeat what was done there, but it is true that we probably have to check the total amount that is available for them. Yeah. Okay. So we get the election data from the Italian Ministries of Domestic Affairs. So we basically have a lot of characteristics for the mayor, for the election, so the year and the turnout. But for the mayor, we know the gender, the age, the educational level, whether it's an incumbent or not. So the question of before, and also the number of votes obtained. Of course, this is important for us because we want to establish the margin and the list, the candidate list. We get social demographic data from the National Institute of Statistics. So we have a lot of characteristics at the municipal level in terms of the level of education of the population, tourism, because we wanted to check also something from the economic effect of COVID. The average income, the population by age group, the level of female employment. And then we have this balance sheet data where we are going to concentrate on competency accounting and on spending. And of course, it will be very interesting also to have the entries, so the revenues, the taxes, but at the moment, I don't have it in this data set, okay, in the results that I'm going to show you. It's complicated, of course, it should be part of the story, but at the moment, we only concentrate on spending and on current spending, because capital spending are also affected by some governmental funds received during the recovery years because of the Next Generation EU plan. So current spending is probably more interesting. I mean, there is more action, more possibility to change it. Okay, so let me see what was that. Okay, okay. Of course, for the identification to work. For our identification strategy to work, we need to test the usual assumptions. The first one is the assumption of the continuity in the density of municipalities around the cutoff, so the so-called McCrary test. Basically, we need to check whether municipalities did not manipulate the number of inhabitants in order to move from one side to the other, and this works well. And the continuity of variance, that was the question before. So at the margin of victory, we need to show that other things are more or less the same. So that is really by chance that we end up with a male or a female mayor. And this, in principle, we have to check this before, during, and after COVID. And we do this both with municipality characteristics and also with the mayor and the election characteristics. So there are a lot of variables that we need to check that they have to be continuous at the margin of victory. So, and this is the check that we do, and actually we prove it. Okay, so yes, it's actually it's here. But yeah, I don't have time to go everything, but this is the way you do it, okay? So the RDD on covariates, this is pre-COVID, during COVID, and post-COVID. So we basically show that there is continuity of the variables at our margin of victory of all these covariates. So that's the way it works. So this is our appendix. So let me go back. Yeah. Yeah, no, let me go back because I want to show you the results. Otherwise, I will not have time yet.
Okay, very quickly. I might have missed it, but do you also control for the time that remains before the next election?
Yes.
Because you said staggered, that's why I couldn't be sure.
Yes, the time we control for the time, and also because we want to avoid the existence of the cycle. Of the electoral cycle, because we know that there is also gender differences in the I have another paper where I show that there are gender differences in the electoral cycle. So men and women, that's interesting also. I was uncertain whether to present this or the other paper because this is also nice. At the local level, we found that men and women are different in the way they implement the cycle in terms of spending. So men are more strategic because they want to be reelected. Yeah. And we know that the cycle is bad for public finances. So the cycle turns out to have a higher debt for the next mayor. So it's something which is important also to check. Okay, so we try to check for all these possibilities. Obviously, these variables are continuous, but some of them, since we control for hundreds, as usual, when you control for many things, something may happen that doesn't work, but this is just because of the numbers. And so we also include these controls. Okay, so this is the main result of the RDD around the margin of victory. Then what I will show you in the regression is more than RDD. I'm going to show you the difference in discontinuity, which is more demanding than the RDD. But the RDD looks nice because, for example, if you look at this graph, in the first graph, I have the pre-COVID situation. So public expenditure in childcare before COVID in this small municipalities, 0 is the margin. So on the right, we have the municipalities with a female mayor, and on the left, you have a municipality with a male mayor, by chance. And there is a difference. Actually, women spend more in these municipalities because there is a jump. When you look at post-COVID, the difference somehow disappeared. So post-COVID, there are much more, there is no jump at the margin, which is, you have to look locally, okay, around the margin. So basically, it looks like they are more equal after the COVID. So something has changed, and these preferences for childcare, which was more a female issue, disappeared because of the pandemic, during the pandemic. Yes.
Just quickly looking at these results, that would be sort of in line with the story that there's not so much discretion, right? Because if females had already increased it to the absolute maximum, and then during COVID, because of the necessity, the male leaders just did what was necessary. So I think it would be super interesting to know if that's behind it or not.
So now I understand also better what you were saying before. So you think women are already at the top, but the top is defined by what?
Maybe there's some guidelines from the central government how much you can spend.
Yeah, maybe. So they are forced to reduce, which is what we observe actually.
We'll keep the same.
Or they cannot increase.
Yeah, they cannot increase. Yes, well, male, but yes, but still we observe that male increases. So
because they are not at the top.
They are not at the top. They're below the ceiling.
Yeah.
Already at the ceiling, males.
Yes, but this is just still interesting because male are not forced to increase; they do it. So possibly the pandemic changed something, no? Because otherwise,
of course,
yeah, but it doesn't say nothing about the female behavior. Like women might be willing to increase, but they cannot.
Okay, that's fine. They may be willing to increase it, but they cannot because they already spent a lot. But still, men were not forced to increase. And so there is a catch-up at the high level, which is not bad for spend during childcare, yeah.
Do you see if there's any item that kind of like which item they spend less on.
Yes, yes. We see this in economics, in the expenditure for the economy. Yeah, I have this in the slide. Yeah. There's a question.
Yeah, Carlo, you can jump in.
Yeah, sorry, it's a comment not really as an economist, but as a father of two girls in childcare age. So I think I've noticed that childcare became much more expensive during COVID because the number of the kids need to be more isolated, and there were a number of requirements for childcare facilities that were quite costly. So another interpretation could be that male leaders had more buffer to increase the spending that was driven by a surge in cost by the pandemic. So that can be another possible interpretation.
Yes, although actually they closed the school for very long, so basically the expenditure were reduced because they closed the school for many months. So this is not clear for me. Yeah, but we will see. Because
nurseries mainly, right? Because municipalities are in charge of nurseries and kindergarten, not primary school.
Yeah, many of these also closed. Yeah, but we have data also on this, so we probably can check because I try to understand whether this is driven by the number of days of closure. There is heterogeneity. Some municipalities closed more than others, the school. So this is also something that we check. Yes, but I think this idea of the top is interesting because we really see this. No, the difference disappears because men increase. Also, women decrease. So, and this is the comparison before and after. So it seems that also after COVID, it continues as during COVID. Okay, so let me go to the difference in discontinuity. This is the model that we are going to estimate. So share of spending for childcare, that, as you correctly mentioned, is intervention for children. So nursery, preschool education, which is decided at the local level. And then I have treatment, which is a dummy for female majors. So whether you are on the right of the margin. And then I have COVID, which means, which is equal to 1 for the COVID years and 0 to pre-COVID. And then I have an interaction term between treatment and COVID, and the delta is the parameter that we are interested in of the difference in discontinuity estimator, because basically delta tells me the difference between the expenditure of male and female during COVID compared to male and female before COVID. Okay, but then I also have, of course, the other variables by themselves. So treatment, so COVID and treatment times COVID. So I also have the impact of being a woman per se, and what happens for women during the period. So these are the main, one of the main table of our results. What I have here, so, and these are the difference in discontinuity results. So we have that treatment is positive and significant. So treatment means that the fact that it's positive and significant is basically the fact that women spend more before COVID, okay, in the period. Here we are comparing before and during COVID. Pre and during. Then in the next table, I will compare before and after, because I have 3 periods. So we have decided to split them right there. I don't know if it's the best way to do it, but putting them all together would be much more complicated. So before and during. This is before and during. So women, the coefficient of treatment tells you that women were spending more, and this we know because we also know from the graph. So this is what we expected. Then I have COVID. COVID tells you, the coefficient of COVID tells you basically how men change over time. So it tells you the difference for men during the COVID and before the COVID. So it's positive. So men spend more during COVID, though it's not significant. Then I have the interaction effect, which is the coefficient of my difference in discontinuity, which is negative. And this is negative and significant because basically it tells you that the difference is reduced, the difference between men and women before and during COVID. Then I have the treatment plus COVID time treatment, and this coefficient tells you the gap of men and women during the COVID. So it's not significant there. And then I have COVID plus COVID times treatment, and this tells you how women change during the COVID. And actually this is negative because women during COVID reduced with respect to what they were doing before. And I have 5 columns because of the different bandwidth at which we are going to calculate this margin of victory. And actually the last column, so number 5, is the one where the bandwidth is not imposed by ourselves, but it's the optimal bandwidth coming from the algorithm that is typically used in this type of studies, which and the algorithm says that I have to use 0.81, and so that's the optimal one. The others we impose the margin closer to the bandwidth. So basically here the story is women were spending more before COVID and spend less during COVID, and actually the difference with men is reduced. That was something that we were looking also in the graph. So why and how can we, I mean, what is the interpretation? What are the possible mechanisms? What is going on here? So we investigate 3 possibilities. Of course, probably you have other stories in mind, and we can check them. The first possibility is that the change in spending for childcare is simply the fact that there is a change in the overall expenditure. This is the share of childcare, okay, in the previous. So it's a share of childcare with respect to the total amount of expenditure. So childcare may be reduced because the numerator decreases. This share may be reduced because the numerator decreases or because the denominator increases. Suppose that everybody spends more during that period, so I see a lower amount of childcare. So we look at this. So we look at what happens to the total composition of expenditure, and we find no evidence in favor of this hypothesis, because actually what I see is that the overall amount of spending does not increase actually during the COVID, and this is what we have in this graph. So the total amount of spending actually goes more or less similar to what we have seen for childcare. So it's not going in the opposite direction. So it's not they spend less. So it's comparable. So the story that women are spending less because the overall, we see less because the overall size is different, because the overall size increases. It's not there because actually the overall size seems to decrease. So we don't have the story, that mechanism here. So we move to a second possibility. A second possibility says, I mean, at least second hypothesis, has to do with the closure of the schools, of these childcare facilities. So we try to disentangle, separate municipalities with 0 days of nursery closures and the others where these closures happened, so with more closures. And when we look at this, actually we find some evidence that direction. So we basically have evidence that expenditure for schools where so that women somehow saved in the case of the closure of the schools. So it's this is something that we have here. When I divide between regions without school closure and regions with school closure, so 0 days of closure and more days of closure, I see that the effect comes from the without school closure. So basically during the pandemic, female majors in regions with 0 days of closure continue to spend more than men, which means that this is a possible somehow story. Another mechanism that we try to investigate is the compensation story. So whether they were spending more on childcare because they were spending less, for example, in other things. And we find, we run a lot of analysis with all the categories of expenditure, but we find evidence that actually the women were spending less for the local economy. They support what goes into the category of the local economy. So they were spending less than men before COVID in the category of local economy. And then during the COVID, they reduce childcare and increase local economy. So they get more aligned, let's say, in the sense. So they increase spending for support for local economy, probably because in that time that was particularly relevant. Yeah.
So these are all shares, but in aggregate terms, do you find that women spend the same amount than men? Just the total figure would be interesting as well to see.
Yes.
It might just be that.
No, that's true.
The share of schools.
No. There is a composition effect. It's not a total amount. So here we find some evidence in support of the story of the local economy, which, yes.
Just one quick question before we move on. Instead of looking at the share of expenditure, the total expenditure, why don't we just look at expenditure per child? Wouldn't that be like the most like accurate measure that you could use?
Okay. Yes, we control here for the number for the different population in age groups, but yes, probably we can also normalize for the number of children. Yeah, we saw that this was a covariate which was continuous. Yeah, I don't think it will change, but yes, it's a possibility. Yeah.
Yes, I was wondering about the revenue side. You mentioned that the revenue side is not included, and did you have a control for the kind of a fiscal health of municipalities? Because that could be something. I was also wondering about fiscal rules, because in municipalities in Italy, they need to follow balanced budget rule normally.
Yes, the stability pact that I said before. Yes, they have some rules, but this small thing that's below 5,000, they are more independent. They don't. They are less constraints. This is also why we concentrate on these small groups. But they receive a lot of funds from the central government. Okay, so this we know. So it may be also that men and women attract differently this fund. This is also why we concentrate on the share.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I'm going towards the end, but I am almost done. No, it's very good that you give me these comments, because as I said, I mean, this is work in progress. So we find some support that basically there's a kind of substitution story. Then the interpretation we can discuss. I mean, if it's good, if bad, it's better to be, I mean, I don't go into the normative side, whether female leaders are better than male leaders, I don't know, but we want to understand the data, what they do. So it seems that now there is this emergency, so now there is the pandemic. They were spending a lot into childcare. Probably they were at the maximum. So now we realize that, okay, the economy is like the dominant, the prevailing problem. So we move to this, and we reduce. We were spending too little into the economy and too much into childcare or whatever. Okay, so second part, we compare what happens before and after the COVID, because what I showed you before was a comparison before and during the COVID. Now we go to the post period, because we have finally received also the data for the after period. And here is exactly the same. So the same type of specification. So again, difference in discontinuity, but instead of COVID, I have the post. So I compare with the post. So again, difference in discontinuity estimator is what we are interested in. And the results are here. So we basically have, again, that that we have seen during the COVID with respect to before persists also after the COVID. So the difference, so the gap between men and women in childcare expenditure is reduced after the COVID, as we said during the COVID, with respect to the period before. So the result is somehow persistent also over time, and that's let's say our story here. And yeah, I only have a couple of more graphs from the RDD coefficients because you see here the share of spending for childcare by year, that it goes down. And this is basically what we are going to estimate. And the graph is also here particularly nice because you see what happens. So women were spending more than men, and then at some point men spend a little bit more, but they somehow realign after the COVID. That's let's say the summary of the results that we found. Yeah.
So I have a question about interpreting these results. So I guess there's two ways to interpret those.
Yes.
One is it's reflecting the preferences of the leaders, and
Yes.
male and female leaders have different preferences, or it's because they sort of respond to different voters because they have different voters, and the voters, put pressure on them. Now, I don't know if that's a relevant distinction or not, but if it is, one might be looking at incumbents versus non-incumbents, right? Because some of them have, they face re-election and others don't.
We have, because I mean, we have the characteristics of each politician, and the incumbency is one of them. We can do a kind of heterogeneity analysis according to the incumbency or not, which I don't have now, so it is interesting. But I think here what we capture is more the interaction between the preferences of the leader and the reaction to an exogenous shock like the pandemic, okay? Because if preferences are very strong, then you should see that you continue more or less your story. So you were spending a lot, you continue spending a lot, and now we see that that actually preferences matter. But when there is a crisis, for example, the COVID, then preferences matter less. So people do more or less the same thing. So they realign a little bit, no? Because the story is a story of realignment, actually, at the end. So probably because when there is a crisis and when there is a shock, then preferences become less important or less prevalent. So that's more or less how I interpret the result now. It is still unclear to me I mean, if I have to be fully transparent, it's still not 100% clear why men increases. It may be because they have space to increase. So I understand that women were spending a lot, so now they realize that there are many other priorities probably important, or schools are closed, and so they can spend less and put the money into the economy. But men are really increasing and continue. So basically, at the end of the COVID, we are aligned at a higher level, which is also good for childcare, because childcare typically, I didn't mention, is very low, the expenditure in Italy for those things. So if we manage to improve it, that's fine. But we are aligned at a higher level. So probably it's also that this has become important during the COVID, so the preference somehow loses a little bit its power. Okay, so
there's a question.
Yes, Federica, go ahead, please.
Thank you. So just a quick question. The last graph that you showed to us, does it include all Italian municipalities or just the selected sample? And let me just be more specific. I assume, I don't know, I mean, I haven't looked at the data, that these close elections with women winning the elections are maybe more concentrated in the north of Italy. So can you tell us something of whether you've explored any geographical differences in this result, which probably would be very nice if it applied also to the south, where childcare spending, I believe, is lower.
Yes, we do have north and south, and actually there are many municipalities in our final sample that I probably have a data here for. You see the center and the south. So these are the summary statistics of our municipalities. So we have municipalities in the north and municipality in the south, in the islands. So we have also this. The data that I show, so you have all the statistics here, but the data that I show here is only for our sample. the specific sample that we concentrate, so this margin of victory, etc., it's continuous with respect to North and South. So it's not that women are more likely to win in the North versus the South, at least in our sample. We can do some heterogeneity analysis with respect, again. Of course, we can use all these variables to do heterogeneity analysis. I mean, the internal validity is still there, but of course, we can see whether the effect is, we can divide, for example, look at this graph divided by North and South. I don't have it now, to see whether the effect is more pronounced in some parts rather than others. Thank you. Yes. Yes, so yes, I was concluding, but basically the idea is that we have seen these gender differences before COVID. That the male politicians spend less into this category of childcare, but during the crisis they spent more, and they're trying to realign with the female politicians, and also after the crisis, so after the recovery. And childcare, which was a strong female priority before the crisis, because we saw that women were spending more, somehow became kind of common goal for the politicians at the local level. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Paula. That was really great and insightful. And also thank you to the audience. It was a very lively debate. We really appreciate that. With that, we finished the seminar for today. We may have one more seminar to come before Christmas. We will inform you very shortly about that. But with that, have a nice weekend all, and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you.
Really great stuff.